You know exactly what's wrong. You've known for months, maybe longer. You've analyzed it. You've talked about it. You've cried about it in the car on the way home like it was someone else's life. And yet, you're still there. Not because you're weak, not because you don't know better. You know better than most people ever will. That's the part nobody talks about. Because the story we tell about people who stay in bad relationships is always the same. They didn't see it. They were blind. They didn't have the tools. But what happens when you have the tools? What happens when you can see every single thing that's happening? Name it, explain it, trace it back to its roots, and you still can't move. That's a different problem. And it's not a problem of intelligence. It's a problem of what intelligence gets used for. Here's something uncomfortable. Smart people don't stay in bad relationships because they can't think clearly. They stay because they think too clearly. They use their intelligence not to escape, but to explain. Not to decide, but to analyze. Not to leave, but to build the most sophisticated possible case for why leaving isn't quite the right move yet. Every doubt gets examined. Every red flag gets contextualized. Every painful moment gets weighed against the good ones with the precision of someone who has convinced themselves they're being fair. And in the process of being so fair, so thoughtful, so measured, they stay. This is what it looks like from the inside. You make yourself the observer of your own life. You understand the other person's psychology. You understand your own triggers. You know the patterns. You can predict the arguments before they happen and explain them after. You have language for all of it. But language isn't distance. Understanding something doesn't mean you're free from it. Sometimes understanding becomes the very thing that keeps you locked in place. Because as long as you can explain it, you feel like you're still in control. And control, the illusion of it, is often the thing being protected. Ask yourself something. Have you ever talked yourself out of what you felt in real time while you were feeling it? Have you ever thought, I know why I'm upset about this, and somehow knowing why made you less upset? Not because the situation changed, but because you moved it from your chest to your head. That's not clarity. That's avoidance wearing a smart person's coat. And the coat fits well. Because smart people are used to being the one who figures things out. The one who doesn't panic. The one who stays composed. That competence. The same thing that makes you good at your job, good at your friendships, good at your life, gets turned inward and used as a weapon against your own instincts. You become so good at processing that you process yourself right out of what you're actually feeling. You translate pain into analysis before it ever gets to land. And something that should have made you move just becomes another thing you understand. Think about how many times you've said, I know exactly why this is happening, and then done nothing. There's something else underneath this, something harder to look at. The relationship isn't just a relationship. For a lot of intelligent, self-aware people, the relationship has become part of the story they tell about themselves. Who they are, what they chose, what they believed in. And if the relationship was a mistake, a real, fundamental mistake, then what does that say about the person who made that choice? You see the trap. Leaving isn't just about leaving someone, it's about admitting something about yourself that your identity cannot absorb without breaking. That you misjudged, that you ignored what you knew, that despite all the self-awareness, all the reading, all the emotional vocabulary, you got it deeply wrong. And so the mind finds another way. It doesn't say, I made a mistake. It says, I haven't figured it out yet. It says, I just need to understand it better. It says, maybe if I try one more time. Because trying one more time is tolerable. Being someone who wasted years on the wrong person is not. This is identity at work, protecting itself. And here is where the sunk cost cuts deepest. Not in the time spent, but in who you became while spending it. The version of yourself that adapted to this relationship. The coping strategies you built. The parts of yourself you quietly set aside to make it work. You have invested your actual self into this. And walking away doesn't just mean losing the relationship. It means confronting what you traded and admitting it wasn't worth it. That confrontation is unbearable for people who have built their identity around being perceptive, around not being fooled, so they don't have it. They stay. But there's a cost to staying that works in slow motion. Every time you override what you feel, you teach yourself that your feelings aren't reliable. Every time you explain away something that hurt you train yourself to need more evidence before you trust your own reaction. You raise your own threshold for what counts as a problem. And one day you realize you're tolerating things that would have been unthinkable to you years ago. And you can't point to the moment it shifted because it didn't shift in a moment. It shifted in 1,000 small surrenders, each one reasonable on its own, each one building on the last, until you no longer recognize the distance between who you were and who you've become inside this thing. That's not adaptation, that's erosion. And the frightening part is you don't feel it happening. You only see it when you look back. There's another layer, one that people rarely name but almost everyone in this position has felt. You don't actually love the person anymore. Not fully, maybe not at all. What you love is the version of them that existed at the beginning, or the version they become occasionally, briefly, just enough to remind you of what this felt like when it was good. You love the potential, the almost, the idea of what this could be if certain things were different. And your brain, especially a smart brain, is extraordinarily good at that, at taking what is and replacing it with what could be, at running the simulation, at saying, look what this becomes if the circumstances shift. Look what this person could be if they changed. The problem is you're not in a relationship with a simulation. You're in a relationship with a person, and that person has shown you, repeatedly, clearly, in ways you could explain to a stranger in 5 minutes, exactly who they are. You know this. There's a specific kind of grief in that knowledge. It's not the grief of loss, it's the grief of clarity you can't act on. Knowing and staying creates a particular kind of suffering that's hard to describe to people who haven't felt it. Because from the outside, it looks like confusion. But from the inside, it feels like being completely awake and unable to move. Like watching yourself from a distance and not being able to reach yourself. The knowing makes it worse, not better. Because you can't even give yourself the comfort of not knowing. And yet leaving still doesn't happen. Because there's one more thing underneath all of it. Something that doesn't have a clean name. When you've been in something long enough, the pain becomes familiar. And familiarity, even painful familiarity, feels like safety. Your nervous system has learned the rhythms of this relationship. The cycle of tension and relief. The arguments and the repairs. The distance and the closeness. It knows what comes next. And there is a strange, quiet comfort in knowing what comes next. Even when what comes next is something that hurts you. The unknown, on the other hand, has no pattern. It offers no preview. And to a mind that has built its entire sense of security around being able to predict and analyze, the unknown is more threatening than the familiar pain. So you stay with what you know, not because it's good, because it's known. This is the part that intelligent people find most shameful when they finally see it clearly. Because it reveals that beneath all the thinking, all the reasoning, all the sophisticated self-awareness, there is a part of you operating on pure instinct, animal instinct. Stay close to the familiar. Avoid the open. Don't step into the dark. And no amount of intelligence overrides that part of you directly. You can understand it completely and still feel it pulling. You can name it and still obey it. That's the real contradiction. Not that you're smart and you stay, but that being smart gives you full visibility of a mechanism you still can't fully override. And here's the quietest truth in all of it. The most dangerous relationships are not the ones that are obviously terrible. Those are easier to leave. Obvious pain has obvious edges. You can point to it. The ones that hollow you out are the ones that are just good enough. Just enough warmth to stay. Just enough connection to doubt yourself. Just enough good moments to make the bad ones feel like exceptions rather than the pattern. These relationships don't break you loudly. They do it slowly. They do it in the space between who you were when you entered and who you've quietly become. They make you smaller without announcing it. They teach you to want less without ever saying so. And because you're smart, you adapt. You accommodate. You find ways to need less so you're disappointed less. You move the goalpost so the relationship keeps looking like it's working. You become an expert in managing yourself around someone who should simply treat you well. That's not a relationship. That's a coping mechanism that lives inside one. So why don't you leave? Not because you're blind, Because you're standing inside the thing you're trying to see. Because your intelligence has been conscripted into defending a story your identity cannot afford to surrender. Because familiarity has been doing a slow and patient impression of love for so long that you can't feel the difference anymore. And because somewhere underneath all the analysis, all the awareness, all the knowing, there is a fear, not of losing them, of meeting the version of yourself that exists on the other side of this. That's who you've been protecting yourself from. The question isn't why you stayed. The question is whether you're willing to find out who you are when you stop.